bird recording studio on the distant western suburb of Brisbane. And man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your taking the time to be with us and taking the time out of your busy schedule and to share with us your awesome many decades of devotion to birds and recording their sounds and stuff like that. And so, and I want to thank you so much. It's such an honor to meet you and to be here. So just tell us a little bit about how you became interested in birds and recording their sounds and stuff. You've been doing this for over 50 years.
Well, as a schoolboy, I collected birds' eggs, as many of us did in those days, simply because there were no such things as computers and television, and we just had to amuse ourselves as best we can. And that's how so many kids back in the 1950s started their lives. And I lived in the country, so I was out in the bush. Then I went off to the Northern Territory in the Department of Aboriginal Affairs, as it's now known, in the 1960s, and then in 1970 I was promoted to a job down in Canberra in the Commonwealth Department of Aboriginal Affairs, and I was there for another 10 years. But all this time I had been, my passion, I guess, in the background was birds, even though for some parts of my life it wasn't a current activity, but I was a bird bander from the late 50s right through to the 1980s, so I still had that activity ongoing. And I was also involved in travelling all over Australia, what we call nowadays as ticking birds, getting new species. And there was a time when I was actually number 2 in the country, and when I left the Commonwealth Public Service in 1980, that's when I moved to the farm, and we had 2 very small children and no money because I'd left the public service and the security of the public service. And we set up on a farm near Mullumbimby, and in the shell of a house, which I had to sort of keep adding to and building to make it into a proper home. And I also developed a kiwi fruit orchard.
Right.
And that was how I was trying to make an income. But it was also in 1980 when we moved to the farm, and we hadn't been there that long, when I was no longer had the capacity to travel around Australia, because, you know, as a family trying to live an alternative lifestyle, as we believed then, I was just unable to travel. So somebody said to me, one of my friends, he said, "Oh, why don't you take up sound recording?" So at that time, I'd accumulated a lot of knowledge about birds, how to identify them, where they lived, and a lot about their behaviour. And also, at that time, my interest in sound started to develop. So I realised when we moved to the farm, I was not going to be able to pursue the passion I had of seeing new birds. So then someone convinced me to buy a sound recorder. So I bought my first cassette analogue sound recorder and a microphone, and I started sound recording in analogue. And I did a bit of that for 10 years, and I actually recorded 495 species in analogue. And then the age of digital arrived, and I was one of the first people in Australia to go digital in wildlife sound recording. And the National Film and Sound Archive at that time, I went down and I was looking for funding to help me go out there and record wildlife sounds, and they actually lent me a state-of-the-art PCM 5000, as it was then, and a Sennheiser MKH 816 shotgun microphone, which is a very good microphone. Now, given the equipment I had, my analogue recorder and so on, and my ME88 microphone, which wasn't very sensitive, if you like, I suddenly realised that digitally I was getting much better sound, and pardon me, and then I realised that this was my vocation. So from 1990 onwards, I started building my collection. I was doing work on fauna surveys, going out with national parks, state forests, and doing surveys between Coffs Harbour and the border, and sometimes in Queensland. So I was doing a lot of field work and getting more and more knowledge about birds and animals as I did that field survey work. But all the time I had, not long after the National Film and Sound Archive allowed me to use their digital recorder, was only within months that the first DAT recorder, a Sony, no, what was it called? A Sony DAT, TCDM DAT Pro, I think it was called. And that allowed me to start recording digitally onto tape. So I did that for quite a few years, right through until about, must have been around about, yeah, it would have been about 2005, is when I bought my current machine, a sound devices, which allowed me to record in much higher bit rate sound and also much higher kilohertz.
Yes. So this is your current recording gear here now.
The gear on the desk, yeah, that's my sound devices, which, you know, if you turn it on, you get the digital readout, and you can, you know, once you start recording, you can monitor your levels and make sure the bird's not too loud or too soft or whatever you're recording.
And so that one it does not have an internal hard drive, right?
Not this particular machine. No, this is quite recent, this one.
Yes.
It's got a 16 gig flash card in it, so I can record 16 gigabytes of sound directly into that machine.
And you're doing that at 32 bits?
No, I'm doing that at 24 bit.
24, okay.
And 48 kilohertz. Now, I very much use my ears.
Yes.
So if I record at a higher bit rate, that is better sound for processing at a later date. But because, and it also takes a lot more space.
Yes.
But in this day and age, you know, when I first started, I had 145 kilobyte floppy disks, which would record one recording of about 30 megabytes now, if I was lucky. Nowadays you can buy terabyte drives, and my whole collection is on one hard drive now. But so I was very restricted in those days by how much, always very conscious of how much space you were taking up. And you can very quickly fill up your hard drive or whatever you had at that time. But now, of course, space is no longer a problem. So I can record at a much better bit rate and kilobytes and have as much as I like. But I have honed in on recording at 24-bit, 48 kilohertz, because that gives me the capacity to get a nice clear recording of the bird, and as well, say it's a fairly low volume, I can actually lift it 20 or 30 dB as long as the background is not noisy and still have quite a nice recording.
Yes.
In the old days with 8-bit sound and analog, it was awful.
Yes.
So I just never did that. So the ability to actually process and analyse sound now is just so far advanced than what it was. But the other sad part of life is that the numbers of our birds are really, oh well, this goes right across Australia, are diminishing greatly.
And also the amount of human-created noise is increasing everywhere too, and the destruction of habitats and everything.
Yes,
it's a nightmare.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, one of my current projects is I'm very concerned at the decline in the abundance of small bush birds. Now, why I say that? Now, I have travelled over Australia very extensively.
How many places have you visited in Australia?
Sound recording.
Yes. Can you show us your map with the pins on it?
I can, but that means I've got to get out of my database over here and go into, and I can't go into Google Earth without closing this one down.
Okay.
So if I close this down, and this will take a few seconds to do, so we close that down.
Well, we can go back to that.
Go into Google Earth, and that'll load. Oh, there's the map.
Okay.
How do I minimise that thing? So anyway, all those yellow flags on the map of Australia, yes, I can minimise it. Yeah, just by pulling this down.
This is all places where you've gone to record sound.
Yeah, but this is about 10 years old, this map. And at that time, these are places I had recorded all over Australia. But now those numbers of little yellow markers will have doubled by now. So to get a large collection of, and I also do frogs, but to get a large collection, you have to travel the whole country, because Australia has something over 900 species nowadays. So if you want to get sound on every species, you've got to go to all these. Like that little mark up there, if I picked on it, it's probably the Mitchell Plateau up...
in the Kimberley.
Yeah, in the Kimberley. And I had to go up there to get birds like the black grass wren and the Kimberley honeyeater and a few other birds endemic to that area. And whatever this is doing is not working. So
It's beach balling.
no, I'd have to open it.
Well, no, but that's all right.
So, but that just gives you an idea, if you zoom in on that map, where I'd been around the country about, because obviously that's where I live, where the thing is spinning here
Yes.
near Byron Bay in New South Wales.
So you probably know Australia, the land and the people better than anybody in this whole country.
As far as birds and frogs and travelling around to actually record the sounds, yes.
And the landscape too.
Oh, I got a pretty... Well, I lived in the Northern Territory for 10 years. I lived in Canberra for another 10 years. I lived in Mullumbimby for almost 30 years. And I was brought up as a kid down here in Victoria. So I've, you know, I've certainly been all around the... Oh, what's this doing? Let me just get rid of that.
In terms of your recorder here, how long can that operate in the field on one battery that's in it?
Oh, I'd probably get 4 or 5 hours.
Okay.
And that's with the machine actually running.
Yes.
So,
recording time.
The way my technique in recording wildlife sound is I'm not into stereo record. I did do quite a lot of stereo recording back in the early days, getting ambiences, habitat ambiences, and nice scenes of birds as they fly past the microphone and all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, because I'm getting older, I tend to target a species and try and get a good recording, a good mono recording of just that species. So I'm not concerned about anything out there other than getting a nice clear sound of the particular bird I'm interested in. And one of my major problems in this day and age, it's always been around, but jets flying overhead and motor cars going past and dogs barking.
Weed eaters.
Yeah. And one of my biggest problems out in the field, of course, is wind. Now, you can get your microphone out of the wind, but because the leaves rustle and a lot of the background noise is created by wind, that can be a major problem. And there are certain times of the year in southern Australia when you go field recording, you've always got the problem of wind. And of course, the other thing is, on our recent trip to Western Australia, we had a huge problem with bush flies. And of course, they want to land on your microphone and they go bzz, bzz.
Well, you'll have to just do a whole CD of fly sounds.
I could.
Well,
like blowflies, bush flies, march flies, bees, they all have a different buzz. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
but,
and insect series.
Oh, well, you just raised another question. I only record vertebrate fauna.
Okay.
Animals with backbones. I've never really got into the league of invertebrates, like all your insects.
Yes.
And that, to me, is another discipline. And while I do have a lot of cicada sound and I have recorded various insects, that is not my thrust. My thrust is vertebrate fauna. Anything that makes a sound, I will record that sound.
Yes.
So
are there any birds that don't make sounds other than with their wings?
Oh, goodness me. Well, my immediate response to that would probably be, how do they communicate when they're going to breed and
that's what I was thinking.
And make contact? I mean, there are birds that certainly have incredible wing noises, like some of the manakins over in South America. They have incredibly wing noises, and even our crested pigeon, you get this very loud wing flap as they take off.
And also, who has an interesting wing sound is the wood pigeon, the kareroo of New Zealand.
Oh yeah. Well, a lot of birds, that sound you just made. Yeah, sure. I mean, even if a crow flies over your head, you'll hear a sound, or a currawong.
Yes.
They have quite a loud wing noise. Yeah.
Yes.
And there's an aside. For a long time, I used to record wing noise, and I've actually got wing noise of over 350 species in my collection. Yeah, so, well, can you imagine you're out there, and I'm out in the Nullarbor plain, and there's a Nullarbor quail thrush sitting in, Nullarbor quail thrush, the highest growth is up to your knee.
Yes.
And I'm standing over a salt bush, and there's a quail thrush in the middle of the salt bush looking at me, and I'm waiting for it to call. And I stood there for 20 minutes, and ultimately it flew. So all I got was the wing noise. I didn't get a sound of the bird. So it's very interesting over time how often you're sort of trying to creep up on a bird, waiting for it to sing and get closer and get a nice clear recording. the old signal to noise ratio. The closer you are, the louder the sound you're trying to record. And sure enough, you're nice and close. What happens? The bird flies off. Again, I've got wing noise. So it's quite amazing over the years how many times that sort of thing happens. See, frogs don't fly. So one good thing about
Monsanto's working on it.
There'll be no frogs if Monsanto have anything to do with it. I'll poison them all. But anyway, so with a frog, the problem with a frog is when you can hear it calling quite clearly, and you try and get closer, and because they probably feel the vibrations through the ground, and they sense your presence, and they just shut up. So a bird has it can fly away, and the frog just goes quiet.
Yes.
But it's very interesting with frogs. If you have a good chorus, what happens is they're very competitive. So a lot of males, only male frogs call, by the way.
Really?
I should emphasise that. Yeah, it's what they call their advertising call most of the time, and sometimes they have territorial calls where they're in dispute with other males, and they're slightly different. Females will only call when they're in distress or alarmed and say they're about to be eaten by a snake, or you grab one or something. Then they'll go eek or make a sound like that, but they do not have the regular sounds you hear frogs make, and that's males only.
Okay.
So when you're trying to record frogs and you're trying to get close to an individual, because if you've got a whole chorus, it's just meaningless sound. So if I can get, say, 20 centimetres from a frog, which you can, and just wait for it to call. Now, if the frog actually goes quiet and there are a lot of other males around all going for it,
they'll take advantage of the gap.
No, ultimately that frog I'm after will start to call again because he doesn't want to miss out.
Yes.
So, but I have learnt that say there's only one frog calling, or one or two frogs, and I try and creep on that one, that single frog, that frog will go silent. And I can stand there for half a day and it won't call. And maybe if I walk 100 metres away, it might go again. So frogs have that competitive ability. If there's a lot of them calling, the one that might have shut down because I'm too close to it will eventually get going again.
Yes.
Birds, well, you just work at it, and over the years, I will never ever get a collection of every bird call of every species. That's just impossible. But what I have got, I think I'm up to about 680 species of Australian bird that I've recorded.
And almost 70,000 individual recordings, right?
Yeah, that's
some
right.
of which could be broken down into several different portions, right?
Yeah, that I can do that, yes.
And how many of these have you actually looked at more than once?
Well, the big disappointment for me is because I keep sound recording in the field, and now I'm 73 years of age, so my mobility is sort of, and enthusiasm, I guess, is not quite what it was. Because once upon a time, if a bird called in the middle of the night, I'd get up and go out and chase it and record it. Nowadays, you tend to take the attitude, I'll do it tomorrow. Yeah. And of course, if you take that attitude, you don't get anywhere near as much as you could if you jumped up to every sound you heard and you felt you should get a recording of it.
But you're still building your library quicker than you're able to analyze it.
That's exactly what's happening. I mean, I've just been to Western Australia for 6 weeks earlier this year. We've just come back from another trip to South Australia, the Flinders Ranges, north of Lake Eyre. That was another month. And each time I go out sound recording, of course, I record a lot of stuff in the field. Yes. And what I'm trying to do is get new sound, which is very hard for me to get nowadays, or improve on what I've already got. Yes. So if I know I've got a very good recording of a given species, I won't try nearly so hard to get a further recording unless I know that I've got a poor recording of that species, and then I'll have a real go at trying to improve on that.
Yes. Well, tell us what Greg Budney, who's the curator of the Cornell Ornithology Lab, said about you.
You want me to be modest?
Well, no, but it makes the point.
Well, Greg, I don't think his current position is curator of the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology in the United States. My collection is actually lodged with Cornell. It's lodged with the British Library National Sound Archive, and it's also lodged with the Australian National Wildlife Collection in Canberra, which I think
this is. Go ahead.
Which I think is now housed by the Australian National Library. anyway,
so
it was with
year?
the CSIRO.
What year is that through? What they have?
Oh, well, Cornell has my collection from 1980 right through to a month ago.
Really? Okay. Do you update them?
Sorry?
Do you update them with
Oh,
new
yes.
stuff? Okay.
When they have people who come out into the field in Australia, and they bring a hard drive over here, and I just update my collection.
Okay.
The Australian National Collection, I'm probably a couple of years behind there, and I must update them also. I haven't had much contact with the British Library in recent years.
Yes.
But
well, isn't what Budney basically said was that you're among the top 2 or 3 bird recorders in the world, but because you're able to you know what you've got and you can find it.
What he said was, my collection is among the top 3 in the world simply because of the way I've catalogued it.
Yes.
In other words, he's not saying I've got the biggest collection or the best collection. It's just it is one of the most accessible collections.
Yes.
Because I've catalogued it in such a way. If you say to me, how many calls for grey striped thrush have you got? And on this database,
show us that now.
All right. Okay. Well, we go in here, and I have to minimise this screen. I go in here, and where are we?
And how many kinds of traffic noise do you have? Hundreds.
We looked at that yesterday.
Yes.
Far too many. Alt F6. Okay. Now I just type in here, shrike thrush, S-H-R-I-K-E, shrike thrush. And I only just put GR, and that separates it out from any other species.
Yeah.
And this will tell you how many recordings I have with grey striped thrush in it. So we do this. And there it tells you there, I have 1,156 recordings. But if you come across here, you'll see I rate my calls. The one's a very good, clear call with pretty much nothing else in the background.
Yes.
And number 2 down here is a nice clean recording of the grey thrush, and the signal to noise ratio is such that it's 3 times louder than the other sounds in there.
Yep.
A 3 will be the grey striped thrushes in that recording.
Yep.
But there are other birds that have a fairly strong signal also.
Yep.
So perhaps that's where my collection is less useful, because you really have to know all your bird calls to know which one's the grey striped thrush. Now an ID, that simply tells you that in the background of another species there's a grey striped thrush calling. So if you had said to me, all right, how many good sounds of a grey striped thrush have you got? Here it says 1,156. Here I go into find, and I'll just put a call quality in anything better than a 2, and you will find I've got 135 usable sounds from all around Australia of grey striped thrush.
Yes.
So there you are, 1s and 2s. If you come over here, that there is the this is the old days. Let's get down. That's in my DAT days when I had a CD number and a track number, and where it was on that track and the length of the track, the date, and of course I have a coded locality file. That's in fact telling you that recording was taken 42 kilometres east of Adavale. But another part of my database, I have that coded file there. I actually can go in and it'll give you an expanded version, and it'll say 42 kilometres east Adavale, and then I'll have a latitude, longitude.
Yes.
So every one of my recordings go to minutes and degrees and minutes, which basically gets you to within a kilometre of where the recording was actually made. And that's what that map was about. You saw with pins all over it.
Yes.
So that, but if you go further on into my collection, so down to this is back in my DAT days, but if you come down to the N, when we go to N, you'll now see that number there is this is on the sound devices, and of course that tells you it's 48 kilohertz. That tells you the program number, and I give them, each one will have 400 or 500 sounds. I started at A, and I'm now up to T, and each one of these numbers, if you like, means an actual track. And within the track, I'll have to get out of this one and go back to where we were, and I'll go to the end. So if we go in here, you'll notice that, so you've got, I'll go back a few here. Oh, I didn't mean to do that.
That's all right.
I got to go back to the end. I want to go page up. There you go. So currently I'm working on T, and I'm up to track number 129. So within here, you'll see here that track 127 has got, and I'll just fill it, so now each one of those IDs mean I identify every sound in the background of every track as best I can.
Yes.
So I'll identify all the other bird species, frogs. If there's a jet flying overhead, I'll have jet noise. Have I done it here? Yeah, footsteps. Now I have a habit of trying, when I try to get closer to the bird, I'll actually walk a little bit, and you'll hear me crunching on the ground.
Yes.
So that just alerts the user that on my Major Mitchell's cockatoo sound, which I recorded out near Welford National Park, which it tells you over here, out near Windora in Western Queensland,
yeah.
That tells you that the track length is 3 minutes and 12 seconds long. It's recorded on the 30th of June 2015. There's the bit right. No, that's kilobytes. Sorry, the bit rate is not actually shown here. It's 24-bit, 48 kilobytes.
Yes.
So over here, that tells you the type of machine, which is this sound devices here, and the M67 means the ME67 microphone.
Can you play that for us now?
Which one?
That Major Mitchell one.
I can't, because on my computer no, I haven't actually got that one up.
Oh, okay. Can you play us something that you've recorded?
Oh, well, these tracks we're looking at here. Now, many people will know what a tawny frogmouth is, but do they know what it sounds like? Because it's a nocturnal bird. Whoops, sorry, that's a tawny crown honeyeater. Let me go back to the tawny frogmouth.
Okay.
So, that's a very common bird, and now that's quite loud, and I think you're more likely to hear it if I play it at the lower rate as how you'd hear it around your house. That's how you're much more likely to hear it in reality, if you can hear it.
Yes.
So what I've actually done is I amplify it by just turning this knob. So people have the ability, of course, at home, they can turn up the sounds or reduce them as much as they like. But as it is out in the bush, that reduced level of sound is how people might hear it around their house or when they're out in the field.
Yes.
And it's not real loud, because everything I've got in here, obviously, I've amplified it to the same level, so if I put it onto a CD, you don't have to touch any volume knobs, because
yes.
the sound is the same level right through the track. And that's basically what's in here.
So, well, let me ask you this. Back to your concern that you're hearing, you're concerned with the abundance of small bush birds. Is that both in terms of the different species that you're seeing and hearing or not, and then also the relative number of each one, and what do you think is contributing to this?
Well, I'm very concerned about anything smaller than the grey shrike thrush, and that's a bird about 20 centimetres long, is that right? Or 8 inches if you like. It's a bird that big. So that's my indicator. So here on this property where I live, I've recorded 167 species in far western Brisbane, and we're quite close to the Brisbane River, so we do get flyovers of black swans and pelicans and ibis and all that sort of thing.
Do you have a CD of those sounds from your property?
Well, they're in the collection, but not as a compiled CD, okay. No. So what I'm concerned about is, and I've noticed this, that back in the early 80s when I first started sound recording, the dawn chorus, there were many more species calling than there are today, and I will say that applies to the whole of Australia. It's not just here, it is everywhere. And on my more recent trips, I've particularly noticed, lying in my swag at daylight and just listening, the numbers of birds are just not out there anymore.
And this is everywhere you go.
Everywhere I go. Occasionally, say you might have some eucalypts in flower, and you might have a lot of firebirds or other species of honeyeater will have come in for that food. But if you look right across the board at all the different bush birds that are out there, they're just not around anymore. And a classic example, I was going for walks here in this suburb, and I'd do a 4-kilometre walk, and I was actually counting the birds during my walk smaller than a grey shrike thrush. And I might hear one eastern yellow robin, I might get 2 brown honeyeaters, 2 woolly wagtails, and I might finish up after a 4-kilometre walk. I will have heard maybe 25, 30 small birds call in that time. And in the old days, I could guarantee you I would have heard hundreds in that walk.
What are the contributing, what's making this happen?
Well,
encroachment of civilization, poisons in the environment?
I think drought might have had a big problem, because that does reduce the food source for a lot of our insectivorous birds, because insects will die off in drought. And the trees, you know, the abundance of flowering is probably not the degree it was. And of course, then you introduce all the other elements of land clearing and human habitation and spread. And one of the major issues, I believe, are feral cats,
yes,
which have gone wild out in the outback. And you can drive just about anywhere other than in the wet tropics. Cats are in just about every environment, and it's a real worry.
How many would there be? Tens of millions?
I think I heard don't quote me on this, but I heard a figure somewhere that it's estimated there's about 80 million feral cats in Australia.
Oh my God.
And my concern is every cat's got to eat every day, and they have to eat a native animal. If they're feral and they're out in the wild.
They like to kill things too that they don't even eat.
Yeah, they do that. So
it's just all these factors combining.
And I think climate change, you know, as some of those extremely hot days. I mean, before the bushfire in Melbourne, apparently it was 46 degrees in Melbourne on that day. And then the fire front, apparently birds were just falling out of the sky, dropping dead on the ground in front of people. And that's an extreme event. But I think, you know, as it does get hotter, I think you'll find that the birds are, and particularly if there's a drought, and the lack of food is around the extreme heat, they're just having this, you know, they just can't survive.
It was pretty nice and hot in front of your fire last night.
Oh, yeah, well, that's man-made, isn't it?
No, well, but it was a very cold night.
It was a cold night last. Well, the other interesting thing is Australia, while we're down in the Flinders Ranges only 2 weeks ago, they had that extreme weather event where they had all this snow and ice down south, you know, in southeastern Australia, down around Canberra and that sort of region, where they were very concerned about telling people not to drive because of black ice on the roads.
I know what that is from Colorado.
Yeah, so you've got 2 extremes. You've got 46 degrees of heat with these extreme bushfire events, and then you've got the other end of it with these extreme cold weather events that are happening. And of course, then you've got the bad floods we have.
Yep.
And then you have the bad droughts.
Yep.
And, you know, things are just getting harder and harder for our animals to survive. And then, of course, you've got human pressure and all the other elements we've introduced to make it, you know, clearing of habitat and expansion of human beings taking prime habitat where they want to live on the east coast. And
Roundup.
Roundup, well, that, now you mention Roundup. I don't know if people are aware of this, but frogs are very susceptible to herbicides and weedicides.
Yes.
So if you want to have a nice clean bank around your frog pond and you spray it with Roundup, you're effectively killing your frogs, because and of course in gardens in cities, well, a lot of people use that.
Well, how many people whose mentality have the mentality of that? They'll go like, well, that's just a shame if we have to kill the frogs to have a pretty pond.
Well, I can't really answer that. I don't know. I just know, and I often say to people, I mean, even on the golf course behind us, I've noticed that they've sprayed around the bank of the dam to get rid of all the rushes and whatever, so the golfers can probably find their golf balls easier, but they've got no frogs anymore. Because, I mean, I have recorded 20 species of frog on this property, and we have a dam down the bottom which dries out. And in recent times, if I can get 10 species in a month of frog, I think I've done well. But of course, we don't spray here. Now, the minute I start spraying chemicals around the back of that dam, well, we won't have any frogs.
Absolutely.
So that is something that many members of the public are probably not aware of, by having a nice looking garden where they use weedicides and herbicides. If they want to have frogs, well, they won't.
Have you heard of Rachel Carson?
No, I haven't.
Oh my God, I've got to tell you about her. She basically founded the whole environment movement in the 1960s when she wrote a book called Silent Spring, that's about the impact of DDT and other pesticides on birds. And it's a very important book because it's just as relevant now as it was ever. Let me ask you this, in the interest of time, can you just tell me about your microphone there, and then maybe we can go out and into go outside for a little bit.
Oh, this microphone it's a directional microphone. It's not the best microphone by any means, but it's a good microphone. And for instance, I can record a bird at 100 metres, and I'll get a nice clean signal at that distance, as long as there's no wind and there's no jets and everything else. And it also depends on the amplitude of the loudness of the bird's call. So it's a soft call, obviously I've got to get a lot closer, but a loud call like a magpie or a butcher bird, I can get quite a reasonable recording at 100 metres. So for my interest, what I try to do is get a record of a given call anywhere in Australia of any species. So I'll get that first, and if I'm 150 metres away, I've got something.
Yes.
And then I will try and get closer to that bird. And sometimes you can walk up, and I often try and conceal myself, like come up behind a ridge or walk in behind a tree or a bush, or have something between me and the bird so it can't see me.
Yes.
And with a bit of practice, sometimes you know I can get within a couple of metres of a bird, and then you get a brilliant recording. But many of the time happens, of course, the bird sees me and flies away.
Yes.
But I've still got the best I could get on that occasion.
Yes.
And as I travel around the country, and you know, even a common old grey-striped thrush or a woolly wagtail, if I happen to have a bird call well close to me, I will always record it.
Yes.
Because it's obvious that the call, like your voice and my voice, are different. So every bird, there's going to be a difference in the voice, even though you and I can't hear it. And another thing I firmly believe is when you talk about the language of birds, I would say that birds have quite a vocabulary that you and I never hear. And I know at times I've been with an emeter of, a little group of wood swallows or something, and they have this beautiful sub-song that you can hear them chortling away, if you like. I'm sure they're singing and talking to each other. And while we hear what we often call alarm calls and contact calls and distress calls and feeding calls and flight calls, the human being will label what they think the bird is doing.
Yes.
Well, I don't think you can call it an alarm call because you don't know.
No.
You can describe the situation the bird is in when it made that call, and you can say, well, maybe it's alarmed or whatever, but you can't label it because we don't know.
No, that's a very important distinction.
Well, all we can do, you'll hear somebody say, oh, flight call. No, it's not a flight call. That call was made when the bird was in flight.
Yes.
It might have 10 other calls it may make when it's in flight, but
yes.
You can't label it a flight call. And all through my collection, when you hear me, at the end of every recording, I'll name the bird and I'll talk a bit about the habitat and what the call's about.
Yes.
But I will not label a call, simply because when a bird sings, we call that song or advertising. I think you can say that because in the breeding season, birds do sing. So if you want to call that song, fine. But a lot of these single note calls that you hear birds make, I don't genuinely believe we can actually label it correctly. We
Absolutely.
can just say what the bird's doing when it makes the call.
Yes.
So, sorry, what was your question again?
Well, you answered it, but let me ask you this. Yesterday, when we first came in, you played us a sound that was at 11,000 hertz. And asked if we could hear it. Is it possible to play that so I can record it?
I can. I don't know if you'll hear it here. This is where is it? A white striped mastiff bat. Now I'll turn this volume up.
Yes, a bat.
And I believe this is about 10,000 hertz.
And there was a cricket too.
There's a cricket. The very high-pitched sound is the bat.
Yes, the little cheep.
And it's one of the very few bats you can actually hear.
Yes.
Because
Most of them are ultrasound.
Now that's turned up quite dramatically.
Yes.
In the hope that your sound recorder can pick that sound up.
It will.
But yeah, so there are very few bats you can. Obviously, you can hear flying foxes call, but all our little micro bats, they have a frequency range from 20 to 80,000 kilohertz, which is beyond human hearing.
Yes.
So a friend of mine, a chap called Chris Corbin, he developed what is called Anabat, and that converts that sound of 20 to 80,000 hertz to an audible range where the human being can hear it. So he can actually go out and record the bat sounds and display them as a sonogram, and you can see what the call looks like, but you can't hear it.
Yes. Unless
he plays it as it's converted by Anabat to a sound level where we can hear it.
Yes. Do you have the ability to show sonograms for your sounds?
Not right at this minute, no.
Okay. But if you made a DVD with all your favorite bird sounds and you talking about it and sonograms and stuff like that, that would be really, really interesting.
Well, interestingly, this frog app that we've recently produced that I showed you yesterday, that has a WAV file, which is what this is here.
Yes.
This what I've got up on the screen. And if you in a WAV file, you can see how many pulses a bird has in each bit of its song. So here, for instance, what am I looking at? That's a very common frog. Now, if I want to expand that out, and you can see the actual pulse rate, so I can do this. And I can get down to the individual calls here, like this piece here. Now I can blow that out, and you can actually count the number of pulses in each call. See here?
Yeah.
And in a frog, now this will just go whoop if I play it, but from there to there is the number of pulses in each single call.
Yes.
And that helps you quite dramatically to identify many species of frog by just simply counting the pulses.
Yes.
So if I do this, you'll see it's just, you can't really see it.
Yeah.
But each one of, from there to there is actually a pulse, and I think I can even blow it out further. There's one pulse, so I'm actually blowing it out, and I can keep doing that.
So each one of those might be a specific vibration of its membrane
one
or
of
something.
Its calls in its sequence. So that is one call in that chorus,
yeah.
And it's got that many pulses in it. So I'd have to go back to where, I can blow that out so it takes the whole screen.
Yeah.
So there you can see, you can count the actual pulses. But if I go back to where we were, and you keep doing this, there's the pulse I'm talking about. That's the call. And hang on. And that's a chorus, so it's not a real good example.
Okay.
What I really need is an individual, but at the moment well, as you know, I'm having computer problems, so
yes.
I'm a bit limited in what I can show you today.
That's all right. Well, let's go outside for a while.
All right. Okay. So
right there. Brown cuckoo dove.
Mm.
Here we are with Dave Stewart out in your back paddock. And this is, you've got your recording gear. This is how you would typically go in the field, except minus your hat.
Mm.
And so you've brought us here because this is where the Australian Geographic came and filmed you, only they made you go up a tree.
That's true.
And who did we just see a second ago? A brown cuckoo?
A brown cuckoo dove, which is quite an unusual bird here. It turns up irregularly, and it's the first time this year I've probably seen it here actually. And the other one that was of interest is a rose robin, which is only a winter visitor, and it may be here for a couple of months because it's an altitudinal migrant. And I heard it calling across on the golf course, and it was going eek, 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 eek. But it stopped now. That bird you can hear is a white-browed scrub wren and crow, grey fantail. But getting back to my declining abundance of small bush birds, here's evidence that there's not much happening at the moment.
Oh.
Mm.
Well, show us how you would go about, say, if I weren't here and you heard a sound that you wanted to record, what would you do?
Well, first of all, I have to turn the microphone on. I have to turn on my mix That was an eastern whipbird then.
Yes.
My preamp, and then I have to turn on my recorder.
And do you monitor it through headphones?
The reason I don't do that is because I'm an opportunistic sound recordist, I tend to track the bird.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if you've ever done it, but if you've got headphones on and you're trying to track a flying bird, it's very difficult. So whereas in my instance, I'll hear the bird and you'll see me just panning around like this. And I'm actually, there's a scrub wren just called over here. So I would track that bird if it's flying or moving around. And I'd always have my microphone on the bird because it's a directional microphone. And it's very important. It's like a shotgun. Yes. It's very important. This is pointed. See the noisy miners at the back?
Yep.
Now, it's very important I have the microphone pointed right at the source of the sound. If I've got headphones on, very difficult to know where the source of the sound is, particularly if the bird's moving.
Yes. And so that has a very narrow field, right?
Well, yeah. The noisy miners, they're the biggest problem we have here because they chase all the smaller birds away.
Do they?
Yeah, and around areas where they occur, particularly in cities, they are a big problem in people's gardens because they drive all the little birds away. They are a big problem. So anyway, so now, well, there's a few birds calling here. You've got Lewin's honeyeater, noisy miners. Got a little scrub wren over here. Now those noisy miners, that's what I'd call a congregation call, or a number of birds are calling, whether they're deciding whether to gang up on some little bird and chase it away, I don't know, but I'd say they're up to no good. So there are very few, actually, yeah, I can see a bit of movement up here, but my eyes aren't good enough without getting onto them with binoculars to tell you what they are.
But so you work hand in, you might have your binoculars in one hand and your mic in the other.
Oh, well, when you're sound recording, it's very important to know what the identity of the bird is.
Yes.
So often if I'm not sure what it is, you'll see me like this. And as I'm recording them, I still want the sound.
Yeah.
And as I'm recording the bird, I'll be looking at it through my binoculars to confirm the ID of the bird.
Yes.
So these are quite light, these binoculars, and they're very good. They're Swarovskis.
Yes.
So, yeah, I don't do that so much here because I know all the calls.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I'm over in Western Australia and there's something calling, I may not necessarily know what it is. So I have to get a look at it and work out what it is. And one thing about my collection, I've got very few sounds in there that are labelled unidentified.
Yes.
So I make a big effort to try and identify every sound I record. And later on, if I haven't identified it at the time, as I'm working on my collection, I'll suddenly say to myself, oh, that's what that sound was. And then I'll just go and put a name to it. See, a grey fantail just calling in here then.
And the Maoris call him Piwakawaka.
Who is?
The Maori name is Piwakawaka for the New Zealand fantail.
Oh.
Piwakawaka.
Well, I've actually recorded. That's something I didn't tell you earlier. When I go overseas chasing bird families, I've recorded in many countries of the world.
How many countries?
Oh.
30?
I would have visited about 50 and probably sound recorded in maybe 15.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I always take this gear with me.
Yes.
Yeah.
You probably don't go out of the hotel without it.
Well, you've got to worry. Well, I'm a bit of a worrywart, and I do tend to worry about security. I know when I first went to China, I thought they'd probably confiscate my gear.
Really?
So I didn't take my best equipment.
Yes.
And of course, as it turned out, it was no problem at all. So I would have got much better sound recordings in China than I did had I taken gear like this rather than, well, nowhere near as good quality recorder that I took. Yeah, so that was interesting.
A couple of more sort of general questions. And did you say that that there's approximately 900 or so known species of birds that live in Australia?
Yeah, that touches on a subject I'm not particularly happy about. In the old days, Australia had a list of birds in Australia and within, well, nowadays I know it's 200 nautical miles of the coast, but because Australia has territories and you have a lot of people who are interested in seeing birds in Australia, that are on the Australian list. They've now extended the Australian list to include places like Christmas Island and then Cocos Keeling Island. And to someone like me, they are in different bioregions, and those birds don't really occur in Australia unless they are right here as vagrants.
It's political Australia.
Oh, yeah, all right, it's political Australia.
But
and
not
in the old
geographic.
days, when I was heavily into this, running around the country looking at birds, we had a line more or less drawn through the middle of the Torres Strait Islands saying, okay, anything north of that line are New Guinea birds. Well, nowadays, because a lot of the islands in Torres Strait are in fact Australian territory, there are 3 islands, Boigu, Sabai and Guan, which you can actually stand on the island and you can see New Guinea from those islands. So another thing that birders are doing are going to those islands, and if they see a bird on those islands that's not on the Australian list, they add it because they're Australian territories. So to me, the Australian bird list is somewhat inflated beyond what I would call reality of what really belongs to Australia.
So tell us how the ostrich got on there.
Oh, well, I think
because one escaped, right, and became feral?
No. There was a time when they were farming ostrich on a property in the desert, if you like, just north of Port Augusta. Mm-hmm. And that was a commercial operation. But, and this goes probably back into the early 80s, when I actually went there when it was known that those ostriches had become feral. In other words, they were running wild. And in Australian ticking terminology, if a bird is known to, a domestic bird like a wild turkey, for instance, or a guinea fowl, if they are known to have occurred in the wild and bred over a period of more than 10 years, then they become part of the Australian bird list, if you like.
Yes.
So that's how the ostrich turned up. But there is a place down near Barham, near Echuca, where I believe people are now currently, if they want to see an ostrich on their Australian list, they go there, see the birds and tick them.
Are there feral chickens?
Jungle fowl. It's called the red jungle fowl.
Okay.
Now.
But I mean, have domestic chooks escaped and then become established?
Yeah, well, yes. Well, certainly if you want to see red jungle fowls nowadays, I think you'd probably go to Christmas Island. And on Cocos Keeling Island, you've got a bird that occurs there called a green jungle fowl.
Yeah.
And it's really a bird from Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
So if you want to add that to your Australian bird list, we actually did it from the airport.
Yes.
As the plane took off, we saw a red jungle fowl, a green jungle fowl on the airstrip as we took off. So.
Oh. Well, now, how many bird species are known to exist on the whole planet?
I think it's around about 10,000.
That's all?
I think so.
Really?
I can't give you a precise number.
I would have thought there'd be 100,000.
Oh, no, 10,000.
The entire bird kingdom, only 10,000?
Yes, yeah.
Wow.
Well, my particular interest is bird families of the world.
And how many of those
are there? And there's
there?
about 230 odd.
Yes.
And I'm within about 15 of all of them, but I'll never see all of them because sometimes in a bird family, as I explained to you last night with the plains wanderer, you have a species, then you have a genus, and then you have the family. Well, a plains wanderer is one species, so it constitutes the species, the genus, and the family all as one bird.
Yes.
So my problem around the world, there are birds like that, like Magellanic plover and the sun grebe in Central America. There are the Egyptian plovers and other. They're only one bird within the family.
Yes.
And that's a massive trip to go and see that one bird to sort of try and see all the family.
Absolutely.
So I'll never achieve it in my lifetime.
Well, now let me ask you this: what about birds that assimilate or imitate or mimic the sounds of other birds and other sounds? Do a lot of birds do that?
As far as I'm aware, you see, one thing about mimicry, you really need to know a lot about bird sound to be able to even comment that that bird is mimicking. Because basically you have to know the sound of the particular species that it's actually mimicking.
Yes.
Because sometimes some birds have quite a repertoire of their own.
Exactly.
So is it making one of its own calls, or is it actually mimicking the known call of another species?
Well, and if it regularly does that, then the other call could be called its own.
It is called mimicry.
Technically. Well, listen to this. When I was in New Zealand, I clearly heard and have a recording of a kaka imitating a moorpork.
Really?
Yes, clearly.
Right.
It was right at dusk. And I also have a recording of a tui clearly imitating what we call a kotari, the little blue kingfisher over there. He goes,
a little blue kingfisher?
Yeah, that lives in New Zealand.
You got a sacred kingfisher?
No, this is not the sacred one. It's called kotari. I'll show them to you.
I don't know that one.
Yeah. He goes, they arrive over there like in September, and they're there for all through the summer.
Oh, interesting. I don't know that one.
It's different from the sacred kingfisher.
Yeah, okay. Oh, well, I've learned something today.
Well, but I mean, to hear the kaka imitating the moorpork, you know, the little owl was so, it was so, but it was, you could hear it, easily hear it.
Well, that clearly is mimicry.
Yes.
Because it's making a call, you know, belongs to another species.
Do you reckon, are they just doing it for entertainment?
Oh, it's probably part of their advertising repertoire, trying to, like a superb lyrebird is a classic of how many birds it mimics.
Ah, and William Ricketts imitating the lyrebird.
Yeah, so, you know, a lyrebird can, I don't know, you know, in some of my sound recordings, I've actually identified 15 different species within one track.
Yes. So
how many species a lyrebird has in its total repertoire, I don't know, but usually they introduce sounds to probably try and impress the female.
Yes, but don't they also integrate other sounds like cameras clicking and chainsaws?
Yeah, and they can do that. Yeah. I'm not a great fan of that sort of thing, but they can do it. Yes.
What about parrots like cockatoos imitating human speech? Is that still mimicry? Or?
Oh, goodness, I can't answer that.
But they clearly do that, don't they?
Well, I suppose.
And can't magpies
I suppose
speak?
It has to be mimicry. Yeah, I guess that does have to be mimicry, yeah. I never thought of it like that.
Well, I'm sort of running through some of the interesting, we're talking about birds in general.
Yeah.
But this is a big question. You love the birds. Who are they? Are they descendants from dinosaurs?
I believe so, yeah. Archaeopteryx is where it all started.
Yes, was that the first known bird?
Well, that's a flying dinosaur.
Did it have feathers?
I'm pretty sure it did, yes.
Whereas a pterodactyl was just like a flying reptile, right? It wasn't actually a bird?
Oh, I should know this,
well,
but
nobody knows for sure.
Yeah,
we've seen the fossils.
Look, there's a bird up there. I was wondering if you want to put your camera on it.
Well, hold on a second. What is it again?
A black-faced cuckoo shrike.
Yes.
It's a grey bird with a black face. I don't know how well your camera's bringing it up.
I'm getting him as a silhouette.
Because if he turns his head around, you'll see the face is black. But yeah, okay. It's another bird for my month list, if you like.
Okay. Very cool.
You know, there he goes. He's just flown.
Okay.
Yep.
So how many have you seen this month?
Species?
Yes.
Well, we've been away most of the month.
Oh, that's right.
So I'm probably up to about 40. Usually my month list depends whether because I count anything I hear.
Yes.
Obviously I'm going to hear stuff from off the golf course.
Yep.
So usually my number's probably between 55 and 80.
Do black cockatoos come through here?
Rarely. I've had both the yellowtail black and the glossy black have both come through this property, but that's a very rare event.
What about white cockatoos?
They're common. They're here all the time making a hell of a racket.
Some people think that they're a bit cacophonous.
Well, there's that. Can you get that sound over here? Why not? That's a woolly wagtail. There's a little rose robin over here somewhere. I just heard it go, eek. If we walk over here, can we do that?
Yeah.
I might see him. He'll probably fly.
Is your recorder on?
No. He's somewhere just here.
On the ground?
No, he'll be perched. And these robins have a habit of staying very still. So it may well, you only called me once. I don't know, you probably didn't hear it.
No.
I heard it on the golf course before and it just went, eek, and it repeated, you know, and that sort of confirms what it was. But that bird that called just then, I only heard the eek once. Now, wherever it is, I can't see it. but they do sit quite quietly, and they're only winter visitors. So it'll only be here from this month, and it could arrive as early as May and depart as late as September.
Yeah.
But if I hear it a couple of times in that period, then I know it's here. And that's the first time this month I've heard that bird. Yes.
Really? What's the most beautiful melodious bird song?
Well, when you say melodious...
Well, that you love to listen to.
Well, my favourite birds happen to be two desert birds. One is the chiming wedgebill, which I played to you last night, and the other one is the crested bellbird.
Can you play these two sounds when we go back in?
You know the trouble I'm having with my computer.
We'll
I can try,
yes.
But I can't give you any guarantee on
Yes.
that, but I probably can.
Are these the same bellbirds that I would hear in New Zealand?
No. That's a totally different bellbird, the New Zealand bird.
Okay.
Yeah. The chiming wedgebill is a close relation to the whipbird.
Yeah.
In the genus Saphodes. And I think the whipbird is too. So by chance I've chosen two birds out of the one family that are my favourites. It's interesting.
I thought of a bird that might not make a sound. A hummingbird.
They make sounds.
Do they? What do they sound like?
Oh,
I mean,
gee,
other than their wings whirring.
I can't tell you, but there's probably a couple of hundred species of hummingbirds.
And they all make sounds.
Oh yeah,
Really?
absolutely.
Like would you think it was a bird?
Yeah, you could probably describe it as a little bit insect-like.
Really?
But as far as I'm aware, I've seen a lot of hummingbirds, and every one of them had a song or a calls that you could hear them make.
That
quite
is so
clearly.
interesting. We used to see them in America a lot, but I haven't. You don't have them in Australia.
Because in Asia they're called sunbirds,
Are they?
and then over in the Americas they're called hummingbirds.
Yes.
But no, I've recorded quite a few hummingbirds,
Yes.
and of course.
Now who's that?
Hey, turn around. Look through there, between those trees. Come over here, the golden whistler.
There he is.
Male.
I see him. Wow, that's beautiful.
That's an adult male golden whistler.
Wow. This was a perfect example of how the stupid human noise has to come at the exact
the car
instant
happened to go right down the road, and you got a tractor at the golf course.
but always precisely timed at the exact instant when the rear bird is about to sing.
Well, that's why I rarely record here.
Yes.
Because of that problem. You know, there's a rare honey eater in Australia called a grey honey eater, and it's very difficult. It's probably the hardest honey eater in Australia to see.
Yeah.
And most bird watchers like to add it to their list.
Yeah.
And I was down at a place called Payne's Find in Western Australia, which at that time happened to be the most southerly record of that particular species.
Yeah.
And the bird started to sing. And just as it started to sing, an aeroplane started to come in the background, you know, a single prop aircraft. And it was so loud, and it went for 10 minutes.
Yeah, because
right
that's how
across
long,
the
as soon as you
spectrum.
hear it, you know you're going to hear it for 10 minutes.
And of course it just absolutely and totally ruined this honey eater sound,
yeah.
which I'd been trying to get a good recording of its song for years. And when it finally happened, I had the a plane intruded. I have got other grey honey eater sound, but that would have been my best.
See, but that's a perfect example of the people in the plains they couldn't possibly think of the fact that who's hearing them on the ground.
No, they don't. But plains are one of my
nemesis, an acoustic nemesis.
I mean, I can be anywhere in Australia. I can be out halfway up the Canning Stock Route. I can be up the top of Cape York. I can be anywhere.
And they just appear
and
out
you
of
hear
nowhere.
the whispering jet. Now, this is interesting. Most people, particularly those who live near airports, you say, "Oh, isn't an aircraft noise awful?" And I say, "What?"
They don't hear it.
They're used to it, and it doesn't bother them.
They're also deaf.
Not necessarily, but with a microphone, it does not discriminate. So if there's an aeroplane out there, it will record it. And when I play back subsequently, there it is. But people with me will say, "Oh, did you have an airplane around?" Because they eliminate it.
It's a filtering thing.
Yes, they filter it out.
Filter.
But this doesn't.
Absolutely.
So bush flies and wind noise and aeroplanes and traffic noise are probably some of my biggest problems.
Don't forget weed eaters and those blowers that people don't use a broom anymore.
Well, that's only in a city.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about out in the bush when you're miles from nowhere.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Like a truck. For instance, you can be out on a cold night, and I could be 15 kilometres from the highway, and I can still hear trucks going down the highway.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I guarantee the loudest bird in the world, I'd be lucky to hear at 2 kilometres.
Yep.
So that's how loud the truck noise is.
What is the loudest bird?
Oh, I don't really know. In decibels, I can't answer that. There are some birds that are, like our rufous scrub bird, a little bird in Australia. It's got an incredibly powerful song.
It's got its noise to mass ratio would be high.
Yeah, and even a lyrebird has got a very loud call.
Yeah.
And, you know, birds sort of develop their song so it penetrates different types of atmospheres.
Yes, yes.
Like out on the plains, you'll have a quail will have a very low frequency sound.
Yep.
Because the low frequencies carry much better over distance across an open space.
Yes.
Whereas if you're in a closed forest, you'll probably find birds have a higher pitch sound which doesn't travel very far, but they can hear it easier.
Absolutely. That's the important thing, is for it to be heard by who needs to hear it.
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
That's a noisy firebird. Oh, sorry. I thought you were waiting for me to identify that bird calling over there on the right.
the noisy firebird?
Noisy firebird. He's quite a regular visit, and that's just what I call a single note call. You might have heard that on your right just then. That's the golden whistler you just filmed. That's his single note call. I think with a lot of bird watchers, they'll know the song, but when it comes to some of these single note calls that all birds do,
Yeah.
I'm talking about songbirds, passerines.
Yeah.
They all have their single notes, and if you learn those notes, you'll find that the birds are around a lot more than if you only know their song.
Yes.
Because generally they only sing well in the breeding season.
Yes.
But otherwise, I mean, any time of the year, if the bird's around, they'll have these contact calls, if you like "Here I am," and they make that you can hear over there.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a rainbow lorikeet just flew through.
Really? So why do the birds really like to, especially if it's a clear sunny day, they love to sing when the sun comes up?
The dawn chorus.
Yes.
To me, I don't know if I'm right.
Religious people would say that they're glorifying the giving thanks for the rebirth of the day.
Well, yeah, sure. I think as far as the bird's concerned, it's advertising its presence, letting all its friends know I'm still alive, here I am, and particularly in the breeding season, this is my territory.
There's a motorcycle.
Well, that's a very intrusive sound.
A lot of the people, it seems like they want their vehicle to be as loud as possible.
Sadly, yes. And particularly with some of the exhaust you hear on cars and motorbike.
Jake brakes.
Yeah, and at night we have some local hoons you can hear doing their burnouts up the highway. And
do you have recordings of that?
I probably have something somewhere, but I couldn't find it.
We should make a collage of just human noise.
Well, that'd probably take a couple of CDs.
But it would have commercial value. It could become put a drum beat to it. It could be the new dance music for the younger generation.
Well, there you go.
We're back in the studio. Now, Dave, how many CDs have you recorded? These are your two best-selling ones that you recorded for the Sydney Olympics, right?
In 2000.
You put them together, but these are sounds of Australia's most widely known birds and just total sounds you might hear traveling around Australia.
Around the bush.
Yes.
Yeah. So you can basically sit in your armchair at home. There are maps inside these covers that show you where every recording was made. So you can sit at home in your armchair and feel you've done a trip around Australia and heard all these birds singing, or in the case of the bush sounds, sounds in the bush all around Australia.
Yes.
It's called, I call it take-home memorabilia.
Yes.
For people who visit Australia.
How many CDs have you released? 20?
No. Well, you see, I started off with cassettes.
Yes.
So I did 3 frog cassettes and 3 bird cassettes. And then I've done about 14 commercial CDs.
Yes.
And what I call fauna survey CDs, which are specially prepared of songs of rare fauna, if you like.
Yes.
I think there's about 18 of those. But they're not really for commercial sale to the public. They are available, but they're highly specialised.
Yes.
So the commercial ones, yeah, they're prepared for the general public.
Yes, and so you've also got how many you've both you've been the subject of television and film documentaries as well as working on them yourself. And so didn't you say you did some stuff with David Attenborough once?
No, I didn't actually do. One of his minions rung me up and asked me if I was available to participate in one of his shoots, but it didn't actually happen.
Oh, well.
So I haven't actually done work with Attenborough.
Oh, well. And so your website is naturesound.com.au?
Yes.
And people can go on there, and you'd like to bring it more up to date. But
yes.
but I still think it's a good source of.
It basically tells you what CDs I have, and if you're interested, you can buy them.
Yes.
But to sort of give you a good, clear, the content of the CDs is certainly available, and there are some samples on there that you can listen to.
Yes.
But there's nothing fabulous about places I've been to and
yes.
that sort of thing, which so many websites have today.
The SoundCloud thing might help you create more access for online listening and purchase. But in a second, can you show us your new apps for smartphones?
Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
So you've got an app for birds and an app for frogs.
That's correct.
And these are relatively recent innovations, right?
No, the bird app was the first to come out in Australia. It's called the Michael Morecambe and David-Stewart E-Guide to Australian Birds.
Is he the visual guy?
It's based on his field pocket guide.
Okay.
So that's got all the species. You've got a drawing or an image of the bird.
Yeah.
Plus you've got maps. You've got information about its its plumage and its calls and its distribution.
Yeah.
And then of course you've got sound from me.
Okay.
Now, so to get the actual bird app, I'm just trying to. I don't know. Oh, yeah, here we are. It's in here. It's this one. So there we go. We've gone straight into the crested bellbird. So as I said, here you've got some images of the birds. Michael's a great one at providing captions, which give you the diagnostic features of the bird. So that's a male there, and he has a little symbol here somewhere. See the little? That's a male,
yep.
And that symbol's a female.
Yes. Can you play the sound?
Yeah, I don't know how loud it'll be, but yes, I can.
Very good.
That happens to be one of my favourite birds, the crested bellbird. But when the bird was halfway through its call, you spoke. But that bird is what I call, ventriloquial. Mm-hmm. And in other words, it starts very soft and you can barely hear it. And then it builds and builds and gets louder and louder until you get towards the end. And I often say to people, because it's a difficult bird to locate where it's calling from, wait till it makes its very last sound and look at that point where it made the sound and eat your bird.
Yes.
And the chiming wedgebill is another one that has a similar structure to its call. It starts off very soft and then it just gets louder and louder and louder. So those happen to be my two favourite bird calls, and they're both birds of arid Australia.
Yes.
And you can see the distribution of the bird here on the map.
Okay.
And you've got two subspecies. Brown is paliscens, and the other one is guturalis. Yeah, the blue is guturalis, the brown is paliscens.
And how many bird sounds are in here? 400 and something?
Species, there's about 650 species, and some species have half a dozen, or I know the magpie and another one have about 12 different calls, and that's because I want to show people from different parts of Australia that some of the other subspecies have a different song.
Yes.
Right? So, and some birds, of course, I may only have one sound because that's all I've got.
Okay.
But usually there's 2 sounds and anything up to a dozen sounds for a given species. So all up.
So now you're going to show us some of your bird books.
Oh, okay. Well, when I first started to really get into in the Northern Territory back in the 60s, one of the problems I had was reference books. So one of my earlier books was Savinian Whittle, because at that time there were no field guides as such, but you had books like Savinian Whittle's Birds of Western Australia, and that was only Western Australia, and that no very few pictures in here, but very good text. And another book.
Can you show me the title of it?
Oh wow, gee, well, that's about as good as I can.
And who's the author? The editor,
Dom Saventi.
Saventi,
is his name.
Sventi.
Saventi, first published in 1948.
Okay.
So that's a sort of reference I had. I had that one. There's another book called an Australian bird book by Leach.
And look at those little pictures. They're beautiful.
Crimson Rosella, and that was probably one of the first attempts, if you like, at a field guide. So that I had that book, and the other one I used quite a bit was another well-known book of that era. Now, are we running again?
Yes.
Well, the other book I used in the early days was by Graham Pizzi, but I didn't have this until, well, this was probably published in, I'll tell you the publication date. This was first published in 1980. So that's a fairly modern book, but even now, as a field guide, it's overtaken by more recent editions. So in this particular book, he's got all the birds, plates, if you like, in one section of the book. His text is in another, and it's very good text, particularly on bird sound. So I use this book a lot when I was learning bird calls. Of course, up the back, he's got his distribution maps. See that?
Yep.
So in the modern books, of course, you have one page, you have a species, you have the text, and you have the map, all on one page.
Yeah.
But an earlier book that I meant to pull out then, and by mistake I got the wrong one, I meant to pull this one out. It's called, I don't use it anymore, but it's called What Bird Is That? by Neville Cayley. Now this in that era was my Bible. So you can see I've got a chestnut rumped heath wren, so I've marked it and underlined it. And but back in those days, they did species more on a habitat basis. So rather than having them in taxonomic order, which they do now, you have a page full of species, but they weren't necessarily, well, here are your parrots. But that's the only reference I had when I lived in the Northern Territory.
Yes. How many kinds of parrots are there in Australia?
I know it's over 70.
Okay.
And I'm not even sure if I count the cockatoos.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they're all characterized by a seed-eating bill.
Yeah, basically.
Very interesting.
So this here is quite an old book, and again, if we go back to the date, whoops, the cover fell off. The date of publication of this one, that's 1958. So this is the book I had with me when I went to the Northern Territory, 1962.
Okay. All right.
So basically, but nowadays, well, we've gone from all these early books, we've now gone to an app, which we've been talking about.
Yes.
And you've also seen my CDs.
Yes. Well, show us how many you've got in there.
Well, all right.
And then if you can show us the frog app, and then we'll be done.
Well, okay. They're my bird apps. Now there's 10 titles there. There's another title here, Bird Calls of the Broome region. Yep. There's another one called Mallee Bird Calls. There's another one called Christmas Island, and I've got another one somewhere. And of course, when I talk about for the survey CDs, that's this type of thing where you have where is one? No, that's Bird Calls of Christmas Island. I haven't got many of these made up at the moment, but see, that's called Bird Calls of South East New South Wales Field Survey CD.
Yes.
So there's 18 of these that I've done for National Park, State Forest and other special requests over the years. Okay. So there's 18 of them.
All right.
And then, of course, I do CDs that people ask me to specially prepare.
Yes.
But those particular types of CDs, all my commercial ones, all those surveys, they are available to the public if they're interested in it.
I'd like to order a custom CD of the most cacophonous human-generated noise that you have.
Goodness, how many CDs do you want?
That's so cool. Um,